If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What was the creepiest, most unexplained thing that ever happened to you? Bigfoot girl, that's what we call her. We saw her at Charles Mears State Park in Pentwater, Michigan. My dad, sister, younger cousin, uncle, and aunt were with us on the trail. Suddenly this blonde girl with no shoes and a red shirt comes out of the woods nearby holding a container, and she gives us a deer in the headlights look. The way she was walking was odd, like stealthily. I laughed at her and said, "Hey look, it's Bigfoot," but instead of her laughing it off, she tore off down a 75-degree slope that's 50 feet down, full of twigs, tree limbs and whatnot. If you walk trails you know the type, and by the time we reached the edge, which was only a split second because we thought she fell, she was at the bottom of this ravine hiding behind a tree, and she kept ducking in and out looking at us like Bigfoot supposedly does on those shows and stuff. It didn't hit us until she completely disappeared into the woods without a trace. No human being can get down that kind of slop that fast, without shoes. And with shoes one would still have rolled an ankle or something, but without shoes she should have easily impaled her foot on a large stump or something. And we seen her go further down the ravine and she was jumping down them. She put her feet together and jumped halfway down, and she did it with incredible speed. She looked normal and didn't seem like her clothes were old or tattered, but what she did defied all logic. She had something in that barrel. It looked like dirt, and it wasn't mushrooms because they were out of season. But whatever it was, she had it buried in the sand off the side of trail in some thick brush. The DNR didn't have any reports on her and everyone thought we were crazy. To this day I can't get her out of my mind and what happened to her. It was in Switzerland, in the surroundings of Zurich when I was 17. So I was running on my normal jogging path, most of it on the open fields, but a small portion of it is through a very dense forest. There are sometimes a few other joggers, but 90% of the time there is no one. One time during bright daylight through that portion of forest, I see someone walking ahead. But as I got closer, what I saw terrified me. It was a rather young woman with long black hair. She was extremely skinny and quite tall, but the most horrifying thing was her arm. Firstly, they were not the same length, one was slightly longer than the other, and she was holding a plastic bag that was touching the floor. Secondly, her elbow was twisted, as if broken. She was walking in a very clumsy way. I was already quite scared, but as I got closer she suddenly stops. Needless to say, I had shivers of fear all over my body. As I get to her level, I can see her skinny face looking at me. I manage to say a hello in Swiss German, but she doesn't answer and simply looks at me. I am then taken by the irrational fear of imagining her running after me. I was too scared to look over my shoulder, so I just kept on running faster until the point where I was sprinting when I got out of the forest. She of course didn't chase me. Pretty much nothing happened, but the sight of this tall skinny creature coming right off a horror movie, stopping to a halt when I got to her level, is enough to haunt now and then when I'm jogging. I have two. First one occurred back in elementary school. I had this really odd and realistic dream that my grandfather was driving me down this wooded highway. We passed this nondescript vacant brick building, and he says that used to be a gunpowder mill back during the Civil War, and then I woke up. I didn't think much of it until a few days later when my family and I were driving to see a 4th of July fireworks show at a nearby park. I noticed the road we were on seemed familiar, and then suddenly I saw the exact same building from my dream, surroundings and all. I started freaking out but calmed down once we got to the park. Some other family members were there, and when I found my grandfather I asked him if he knew anything about the old brick building next to the road. He told me it was a Civil War era gunpowder mill. I still get chills thinking about it. I have no known connections to this building, and I can find hardly anything about it. It is located in the small village of Ghost Station, Ohio. 2. While in Cape May, New Jersey during the summer of 2012, my family and I went to watch the sunset at a deserted beach in the area called Higbee Beach. I heard on the internet that it was haunted by an old man and his dog, but I passed it off as BS. We got there and watched the sunset, but there was this unshakable uneasy feeling. It was hard to explain, but it felt kind of surreal and just kinda off. After about 10 minutes I noticed the silhouettes of a man and a dog way down the beach. I thought it was a funny coincidence and pointed it out to my parents and sister and joked about the ghosts. We watched the figures pace around by the water for a few minutes, veer to the right and fade out like a mirage. We ran back to the car so damn fast. I just remember asking, did we just see a ghost? Over and over again. The figures didn't float and weren't transparent, they looked like a real guy and a real dog, but just very far away. The craziest part is that I looked at the part of the beach on Google Maps afterwards and there was nowhere for the figures to have gone. Ocean on the left, steep bluff on the right, and a rocky jetty leading down into an inlet a little further back. My dad used to be very skeptical, but this experience really changed him. We still talk about it a lot. I've had some pretty creepy things happen to me, but this one instance is different because it truly was inexplicable. I was sleeping in a room in my house during the day. I distinctly remember being woken up from a nightmare. I still remember the nightmare. My family and I were camping and our tent was being bombed. It completely shook me awake. My heart was pounding in my chest and I was so hot and sweaty, so I was 100% awake and aware. I quickly sat up from my bed and looked out the window to give me a sense of time. I tried to calm myself from the shitty nightmare, and as I looked directly across from me at my black TV screen, I noticed the reflection of my entire room and the entire length of my bed fit onto the screen. There was an old woman with short gray hair and glasses, and a red turtleneck just sitting on the edge of my bed looking at me intently via reflection. Obviously, when I turned my head to look at my feet, no one was at the edge of my bed. For a second I thought I was still dreaming. I looked back at the TV and she was still there. I blinked/rubbed my eyes. She's still looking at me. I looked back at my bed to see if there's an indentation of her body over the covers, but there was nothing. I got up out of the bed and ran to the door. I could still see her reflection and sitting on my bed. Before I completely walk out the door, I checked again and the reflection of my room was normal. It was pretty bizarre and I still avoid that room whenever possible and got rid of the old TV. My mom and I used to do Ouija boards a lot. We would put Scrabble pieces A to Z in a circle with numbers 0 to 9 and yes at the top, no at the bottom. We would seal the room by taking a small glass and dragging it around the room. The glass would then be put in the center of the circle and we'd place the tips of our respective forefinger on the glass. One time when we did it, we had someone/thing come through which was malevolent. Seriously fucking malevolent. Its parting words were, "Choose your side, for this is the end of days. I am coming. I am Legion." It was one of the scariest things to ever happen to me. Not long after, I began having experiences. I would wake up in the middle of the night and there was a dark shadow in the corner of my room. Darker than dark, and as time went on, I would wake up to it being closer and closer to my bed. One night I woke up, and it was on me, pressing down on me. I was fucking terrified. The next night, I woke up and there was a girl sat at the end of my bed. She was deathly pale, and dressed all in white. Her head was bowed and her hair, long and dirty blonde, was falling into her face. She didn't turn to look at me, she didn't speak. I looked over to the corner, and the shadow was there again. It didn't bother me again. I had tried to tell my mom about the shadow. She, understandably, put it down to night terrors/sleep paralysis and didn't believe me. I told my mom about the girl. I told her that I'd woken up and there was a girl at the end of my bed. But she didn't believe. A small time later, I came home from work and my mom asked me what this girl looked like. I told her, pale, with long hair. She asked me if she was blonde. I said yes, hair in her face. I had not described the girl to my mom, so it was unlikely to have been a psychological manifestation. But mom had been in the kitchen, and as she turned, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a pale, blonde girl sat on the stairs. Creepy shit, man. So, at last year's Relay for Life at around 2 to 3 a.m., I was sitting with my friends and I must have dozed off. I usually can't sleep and at this moment I've been awake for over 48 hours. I guess I was sleepwalking, but my friends recall me getting up, mumbling something, and stumbling away. They thought I was just getting something from my car and coming back. I recall waking up at the parking lot close to my car, laying on the ground. As I get up, I take very small steps all the way to my car, and black out again. I constantly wake up in my car, in the middle of different roads, as my car is slowly rolling forward or parked. I live around 20 minutes away from the event, but I made it home at my house around 4 hours since I got up away from my friends, so at around 6 something in the morning. When I woke up in my bed, I was covered in blood and scratches, but my car was in perfect condition so I did not get into a crash. The following days I asked everyone I was with for the night if they recall me doing anything, but nobody knows what happened or how I'm alive. Sleepwalking is a bitch. I ended up staying at my grandparents' house for a while one year. This house was built around the 40s. The original part of the house was the basement, and later on the upper level was added on. I ended up staying in the basement because it was like a whole house down there. One night my friend and I were being dumb and sending each other voice recordings. One of the ones that sent over had another voice, a male voice, and it completely cut out what I was saying. There were no other people in the basement except for me, and I have no way to explain it. My grandma swore the house was haunted, but I was pretty skeptical about it. Being dumb, I thought it would be a good idea to see if it was a fluke or not. I started doing voice recordings and asking simple questions. One of the ones that got the clearest response was when I asked, "Why are you here?" The same male voice from before said it was secret. A few times the mic picked up growling. At this point, I'm pretty spooked and I don't even know why I did this because I didn't sleep well for the rest of the time I was in that house, but I recorded myself sleeping. Throughout the entire video there is this really fucked up whistling sound. I thought it was just because the mic on my computer must be bad, but at the end of the video you can distinctly hear a little girl's voice say, "Look what I can do. I can whistle." I was so fucking done with that place after that. I work as a cave guide and lead tours where we take people actual spelunking. Well, one day we take a group down in the cave and everybody is having a good time. We stop to take a break at a part of the cave where you can hear the underground stream that flows through the cave. We have everyone turn out their headlights where it's complete darkness. It's very relaxing. Then all of a sudden we start hearing what sounds like people talking out in front of us and sounds of what seems to be rocks being thrown in the water. The thing is, there is a 100 feet drop in front of us and the stream is at the bottom of that 100 feet drop. I've never heard anything like that before in the cave and neither had the other guy that was with me. It was kinda creepy, but we decide it's just the sound of water sounding like voices, because sometimes if you listen long enough, the water sounds like muffled voices. However, I have never heard that noises coming from that particular spot. It's usually off towards the right of where stop. Which is why it was creepy. This was directly in front of us. We continue and complete the tour and after cleaning up some of the gear decide to go record the noises with our phones. As we are going back into the cave a different tour is coming out. This tour takes people on concrete trails through a different part of the cave, but the walk by where the spelunking tour begins. The guide off this tour looks at the both of us and a little surprised and asks, "How did y'all get out so fast?" We are just like, "Dude, we have been out for an hour." He says that his whole tour could hear people talking back in the cave where the spelunking tour goes. Now everybody is kinda creeped out and we have to call the law enforcement officer and go look for people that snuck into the cave. We never find anybody or evidence of someone sneaking in. When I was about 14, my friend and I went bow hunting on his dad's property. Mainly we just walked around the woods all day messing around. As it started to get dark, he called his dad to pick us up so he would drive us to his mom's house. His dad asked us to wait at a certain spot right by the road at the edge of the property. It quickly got very dark, and for some reason, I don't even remember why, we waited sitting down facing each other about 50 feet from the road, in a spot that was pretty dense with trees. There was absolutely nothing around here but the road and the trees for at least a mile. We were talking about whatever 14-year-olds talk about when suddenly I saw light hitting my face. It came from above. I looked up, but I couldn't see what exactly or how high it was. It was very focused, white, and only seemed to hit my face, nothing around me. My friend also saw it and both of us were very panicked and freaked out. The light hadn't come on and then moved to my face. It was on me from the moment it came on. It shone for about 3, maybe 5 seconds and then went back off. There didn't seem to be anything in the trees, or above them, although it was damn dark, but we were both convinced it came from above the trees. We heard nothing, even though the night was super quiet, and we both said nothing the moment it appeared. We booked it to the road and waited for his dad. I'm freaking out a bit just typing this almost 15 years later. Last year, I was staying at a cabin with my ex-wife up in Lake Tahoe. The cabin was located in an old log flume community that was established in the 1800s. Migrant Chinese workers were used to build the flumes, and many of them died during the process. I'm assuming they were thrown in mass graves or their bodies shipped back to China, because the only cemetery in the area was for rich, white affluent people. Anyways, it was about 2 a.m. when I decided to wander up to bed and go to sleep. I had drunk about a half bottle of whiskey through the course of the day, so I passed out in a drunken heap the moment I hit the bed. After about 30 minutes of being in a drunken sleep, where only a magnitude 8 earthquake should I have stirred me from my slumber, I awoke with massive amounts of adrenaline flooding my brain and every hair on the back of neck standing up. I heard this weird clicking noise right in my ear, and was scared shitless because I knew at the very core of my being that someone was in the room with me, but no one else was there. After being awake and scared shitless for about 10 minutes, I decided my brain was playing tricks on me, and tried to go back to sleep. My ex-wife eventually wandered up to bed after watching a marathon of True Blood or some bullshit, and as she rested in to go to sleep, we both heard what can only be described as someone knocking on our bedroom door with a fucking jackhammer. My wife started yelling over the noise, "What the fuck?" To which I replied, "It's just the ghost." Upon saying that, the noise stopped immediately. It's the only time in my existence where I can truly say with factual certainty that I experienced a haunting, and a truly dickish haunting at that. Several years ago my brother was in a bad car accident, which landed him in the hospital for a little under 3 weeks. When he finally came home there were of course many people sending get well soon cards and gifts and all of that. One thing he got was a big round helium balloon that said get well on it. I thought nothing of it at the time, but the first night it was at home, stuff started getting weird. I had been sitting downstairs in our living room, which was connected to the kitchen and dining room, where the balloon was. I looked up and saw the balloon bobbing up and down, now in the corner of the room. At the time I didn't think anything of it, because I just assumed it was a draft or something. Couple minutes later, I look up, and the balloon is about 2 feet away from me, and floating towards me. Once again, I assumed it was a draft, even though the balloon stopped once it got over to me. That night I go to bed, and I used to leave my door open about 2 inches every night, just because. I was listening to music in bed, not really doing anything when out of the corner of my eye I see my door start to slightly move. I look up and sure thing, the balloon is pushing itself into my room. It floated right over to my bed and I was so freaked out that I just froze and watched it for a second. I didn't know what to do, so I ran out of my room and woke up my parents. I was in high school, so it was embarrassing. They were both asleep, so I knew it wasn't either of them messing with me, and my brother wouldn't have been able to make it up the stairs yet, so I had no idea what happened. I made my dad tie the balloon to a chair downstairs, and I avoided it until it finally deflated. I still have no idea what happened, or if there is a scientific explanation, but I was seriously freaked out. I was meditating one night before going to sleep, when I saw a giant eye in my head. Being curious, and the fact that I have never seen anything before while doing this, I moved towards it. As I got to the edge, I heard a voice from both inside and outside my head, that asked, "Are you so willing to throw your life away?" I sat bolt upright, eyes wide open and fully awake, but there was nothing else. 2 weeks later I was sleeping, and woke up suddenly a little after 3. Like, from a dead sleep to wide fucking awake. I looked around my room and noticed a shadow in the corner across from my bed. I turned on the light and it was a human-sized thing? Like a 3-dimensional shadow. Stood up, blinked a few times, walked over to it, and examined it a bit closer. After determining that I wasn't imagining it, I backed out of my room and went into the bathroom. Took a piss, washed my face, and made damn sure I was awake. Went back into my room, and it was still there. Laid down, turned the light off, looked directly at it and said, "I need to go to sleep now. I won't be able to if you stay there, so could you go away?" Thing faded away, but there was no way I was sleeping after that. Don't know if the two were related, but I always felt they were. Still freaks me out at night though. 8 years ago I unexpectedly lost my mother. I was only 20, she was 41. She took the dog for a walk and her heart stopped, and that was it. As the event unfolded I wasn't aware of what was actually happening. All I knew was that she had passed out and was on her way to the hospital in the ambulance. So, there I sat, in the waiting room at the hospital, wondering what was going on. What was taking so long? Why was my healthy 41-year-old mother randomly in the hospital? Confused, and waiting very impatiently to hear what the hell was going on, I looked at the clock on the wall to see what time it was. 9:02 p.m. At that very moment this overwhelming feeling hit me as I thought to myself, with a sudden chill, this can't be it. And sure enough, shortly after, the doctor came in and let me know that my mother had passed away. Fast forward to the next day, at the funeral home. I was sitting there, with a million things going through my head, while my family was working on the funeral arrangements. The funeral director was reading over the proposed obituary, when I kind of snapped out of it to listen. According to the death certificate, the announced time of death is 9:02 p.m., instant chills. I couldn't freaking believe it. A feeling I can't even put into words, and it's something that I still think about from fairly often. One time, I was driving home from babysitting in a quiet neighborhood. All of a sudden, I noticed a large white van driving right behind me. Like, serious tailgating, I could barely even see the hood of the car. I didn't think much of it and continued my drive home. I lived about 2 miles through a purely residential area from the place I babysat, and after a while I noticed the van was still behind me, even though I had taken a route that could only end up in my tucked away neighborhood. I knew this person was following me, so I didn't want to stop at my house and have him know where I lived. I panicked and drove straight past my house and went directly to my hometown's populated downtown area. I quickly pulled into a parking lot that had a bunch of people and shops, but the driver sped off down the main street. I noticed there was a phone number on the side of his van advertising a plumbing company, So I called my mom to tell her what happened and she called the police. By the time I got back to my house, there was a policewoman standing outside with my angry looking mother. As soon as I got out of the car, my mom started accusing me of illegally talking on my cell phone while driving. The police officer had called the phone number on the van and the man following me picked up. He told her that he saw me talking on my cell phone while driving and wanted to get my attention to remind me to be safe. I hadn't been talking on my phone, which was easy to prove with AT&T's online phone call/text tracking. By the time I could prove it, however, the police officer had gone back to work. Nobody cared enough to follow through with what his true intentions were, but I still see the van every once in a while and it freaks me out. Not too creepy, but one of the few creepy things that have happened to me. I was staying at my grandmother's house, a few months after my grandfather had passed away, and it was around midnight. I was reading a book in the guest room in bed, and my grandma was in her room sleeping. In my grandmother's house in the living room, she has an old radio that never gets turned off. It has a big dial for volume, and she would always just turn the dial all the way down to nothing instead of turning it off when not in use. She also has an alarm clock radio on her bedside table. She never sets the alarm. So that night I was reading and slowly growing tired, when out of fucking nowhere I hear the radio in the living room blast on at full volume, and I hear the clock radio in my grandma's room blast on, same channel, as well. We both got up and I walked out of the guest room at the same time as she was walking out of her room. We were so fucking confused and I went over to the radio in the living room, turned the dial down and she turned her clock radio off as well. We kind of just knew at that point, and felt this silent comfort, and agreed it was my grandpa's doing, and we both went back to bed. Very weird and really inexplicable, and I've tried to find a logical explanation for it for years, but to this day I'm not sure. I have a story that still boggles my mind. I was around 17 years old living in the city. NY. I was working at Home Depot. This Home Depot was in an isolated place. I had no car and I usually take the bus to and from work. During the day it would be fine because the bus would stop 2 blocks away from Home Depot. After 8 p.m. the bus does not stop anywhere close and I would have to walk under a lonely bridge in order to catch the last bus home. It's so dark and all I can think about is that I could get killed and no one would hear me. I usually avoid working late because of this. Well, that week I was obligated to work the closing shift. They close at 11 p.m. and during my whole shift I was so nervous because I knew where I had to walk through. In the middle to my shift I had to work the garden area. As I am there was this one guy who I cashed out and made small talk and he just kept talking to me. I have to say I felt as if I known this guy my whole life. Anyways, he left. After 2 hours he comes back again and offered to let him take me home. Weird, now coming from the city my mother taught me about this stranger danger ordeal. I kindly refused even though I didn't feel not one bit uncomfortable. He said, listen, I am going to be here to pick you up, I just want to make sure you get home safe. Well, thought about it for 2 seconds and accepted. As I closed I thought this guy wasn't going to be there but he was. I got in and strangely didn't feel one bit scared. As he was taking me home he offered to buy me coffee. I accepted. We went to a nearby Dunkin' Donuts. Then he started to ask me questions that took me back a little. He asked me about God and my beliefs. It wasn't as if he was preaching, just asking if I believe. We just talked and talked until it was 5 in the morning. Finally got home and he gave me a kiss on the cheek. I felt something, can't tell you what I felt. He gave me his phone hash and I gave him mine's. When I went to call him his hash was disconnect and he never called. I never saw him again. Sometimes I think that something was gonna happen to me that night if I would have walked under the bridge. This guy saved me. When I was 14 or so, my cousins and I were going down to the lake to go swimming as we pretty much lived in the lake during the summer. I had just walked out of the door facing south and this massive fireball comes over the horizon, traveling a south to north, pretty much perfectly south to north, trajectory, goes over the house. We wait a few seconds and hear a massive crash miles away. I called my mom and she told me to hang up immediately and call the police. I did, and once I told her the dispatcher turns from the mic and yelled, "We have another one." Turns out over 500 people saw and reported the fireball. No planes were scheduled in that area, all flight craft were accounted for, and no meteorite was tracked in that area. It was in the local paper and as far as I know, there has never been an actual explanation to it. No wreckage/debris, nothing, just half a town reporting fireball that by all records was never actually there. Town was Ely, Minnesota BTW. I lived on the north side of Shagawa Lake. This probably won't seem creepy or unexplained to any of you, but fuck it, it always feels so uncomfortable and weird when I think about it, and I have never discussed it at all with anyone. When I was in college, my ex-boyfriend, who I was making moves toward getting back together with, and still ran in the same social circle with, died suddenly. Apparently he was sick and I had no idea, no one knew a thing. Of all our mutual friends, a guy I barely knew was the one who called and told me he was in a coma, and then later that night that he died. His best friend came over to my apartment unannounced the next day, but did not bring it up until I finally couldn't hold it in anymore and said, "So, did you hear about?" She said, "Yes, of course," and changed the subject. I was still completely shell-shocked. She seemed a little down. Not like her lifelong best friend just dropped dead out of the blue the night before. I went to the funeral and most of our friends weren't there. Nowhere near the number of people you'd expect at a healthy young man's funeral. Of who was there, nobody seemed really upset but me. I know everybody grieves differently, but even his family weren't particularly dressed up or devastated. His young sisters were giggling with each other the whole time. Weirdest of all, of the people I talked with, nobody seemed really clear exactly what sudden illness he died of. I'd like to have seen him one last time, but it was closed casket. I'm 99.9% sure he's really dead, but the circumstances surrounding it were so abrupt and strange that I wonder sometimes if the whole thing was faked really, really well. I turned 21 before my friends did, so naturally being an alcoholic I went to bars alone. I was waiting in line one night and an attractive woman who had clearly had too much to drink came up to me and started rubbing on my chest. I was a single man, so if an attractive woman wants to rub me I was fine with that. She said how attractive I was and then started saying how much she missed me. We were strangers. She started sobbing uncontrollably. By that time her friends had caught up with her and saw her crying just before she turned and ran away from me. One of her friends chased after her and the other walked up to me and said, "Sorry about that. Her boyfriend just died 2 weeks ago in a motorcycle accident." She was looking at me kind of funny, but that whole situation was kind of funny. I said no problem and that I was sorry for her loss. She said, "It's weird, can I tell you something?" "Yes," I replied. "You look exactly like her boyfriend." "Like, exactly like her boyfriend. We saw you as soon as she did. We froze and didn't know what to do when she ran up to you. OMG, you look exactly like him." We briefly exchanged pleasantries and I went inside for a stiff drink. 3 months later I was hit in a horrific motorcycle crash and nearly died. I had a randomly assigned roommate in college who was a very sweet, religious girl. She kept to herself mostly, but she was always really kind and polite. This was the first year I didn't seem to have a bitchy roommate, so I was excited to get along with her. About 2 nights after we get moved in, I wake up to hear someone sobbing softly outside my bedroom door. It was a really weird sound, this kind of desperate, creaky sobbing, and I was so fucking scared at first because it sounded like the shit you hear in horror movies, or like The Witch, if you've played Left 4 Dead. I heard someone moving around the apartment and occasionally coming back to my door and scratching on it softly, so I finally summoned the courage to peek out of my bedroom. My roommate was just walking around the apartment, crying. She was sleepwalking, apparently, because her eyes were closed, but when I opened the door her head turned to look right at me. Then she slowly went to the kitchen table, picked up a pencil, and started to scrawl this weird symbol on her door. Looked like a circle with a triangle in it. I asked her if she was okay and she just stood there, swaying and crying, and I was basically just like nope and locked the door, haha. The next morning she was really scared and mad at me because this demon symbol had appeared on her door and she thought I had done it to prank her. She didn't believe me when I told her she was the one who did it, but accepted my denials that I did it and we dropped it. Several times throughout the year, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to her in the kitchen, talking to herself. Every time she would come to scratch softly on my door, and every morning there would be another symbol on her door, and she was convinced it was me fucking with her. I considered filming her, but honestly I was really scared of opening the door because I watched too many scary movies about demons and shit. Then one time, we were in our separate dorm rooms when there was a huge bang from her bathroom. There was obviously no one else in the dorm, so we were both really freaked out, but we decided to investigate. Looked everywhere and nothing had fallen down, and there were no windows or other doors to the bathroom other than the one leading to our living room. Pulled back the shower curtain and there was a huge arc of blood on the wall. She went pale but had no explanation for this. Later that night, while I was studying in total silence, she rushed into my room and demanded to know what I had said. I asked her what she was talking about and she said she was in the bathroom and heard me talking to her, like I was whispering something through the wall. Nope. Skeptical after that, whenever she was gone for the weekend, I always heard weird noises coming from her side of the dorm suite in the middle of the night. Nope. She moved out at the end of the year and that was that. But I've always wondered what that was all about. This one actually happened to me pretty recently. My family and I took a vacation to a national park. We were there for about 4 days. The day before we left, my dad and I decided to go for this hike. It's had a decently steep incline and was about 4 miles long, so one can imagine how far from civilization we were. To top it off, the trail itself was at the end of a remote road. About 2 miles in, I see these two guys walking towards us in the opposite direction. They were both white and tricked out in some serious hiking gear. One was about 5 feet 5 inches and pretty average looking, brown hair, brown eyes, etc. The other man was staring at me. Now this is in the southern US and my dad and I, being brown, look pretty out of place. I can feel a panic begin to rise in my gut. The man continues to stare at me, his eyes trained, unblinking. Finally, the two men cross paths with my dad and I. Reincarnated Batman, the man asks. He looked to be in his mid-20s and was pretty tall and lanky. I was already pretty freaked out, so I just gave him this confused look. He turns around and says okay, my bad, and turns around on his way. Being so flustered, I didn't think to ask him how he knew me. I was certain and am certain that I had never met this individual. To add to this, the park which my family visited is a good bit away, about a 10-hour drive. I regret not asking who he was, and it's still a mystery to me. There's one event that has always fucked with me and probably will until the day I die. I rented a room in a house that my friend had recently purchased after my mom moved in with a boyfriend, and I didn't want to live with him cause he'd be a jackass. It was a decent little 2-bedroom, one on each side of the house. I had only been living there for a month or two and everything had been pretty chill. My father had died around January of that year and my mom didn't want to keep his urn in her house or put it in storage. A little backstory. My dad was a bastard. I never really has a relationship with him and hadn't seen or heard from him during the last 6 years or so of his life, until the cops knocked on the door in the middle of the night and told me he had overdosed. I was not surprised and neither was anyone else, we all saw it coming. So we got him cremated and debated back and forth what to do with him and nothing ever came of it. So anyways, I'm moving in and I felt kinda guilty putting the urn in a storage unit, so I just stuck it in the closet. Now on to the spooky shit. I wake up in the middle of the night, which happens frequently, and I have never been a great sleeper, so this is nothing unusual. I'm sweating balls for no reason and I check the clock. It's about 3:58 or so. I'm thinking, God fucking damn it, I'm never gonna get back to sleep, and I'm a little pissed. So I'm just sitting there thinking what I should do for a minute when I hear a noise. It sounds like someone was trying the doorknob or something. But I know the door isn't locked. I trust my roommate completely and never had a reason to lock my door, and besides, it's his house. I call out, "Nick? You awake, dude?" No response. I notice the noise has stopped. I'm a little weirded out, but I do not leave the bed, just lay back down and try to sleep. As I'm laying there, I noticed my closet door is open and I was looking directly at my father's urn. It felt like I was being stared at or something, but I try not to think about it. I eventually fall asleep and get up around 10 a.m. As I come out of the room and into the kitchen, I see my roommate sitting on the couch holding a gigantic motherfucking kitchen knife, and he looks absolutely terrified. He looked at me like the devil himself just walked out of my room. He literally jumps off the couch and screams, "What the fuck is wrong with you? Are you trying to kill me? That shit was not funny and you are a piece of dick." Or something like that. I'm all sorts of confused and trying to figure out what the fuck he's talking about. Then he lays it on me. This is his account of what he heard the previous night. He wakes up around 4 a.m. to a blood-curdling scream. Obviously shits his pants and jumps out of bed terrified. Then silence. He creeps into the kitchen down the hall from my room and calls out my name, "Warchemix. Are you alright?" Nothing for a few seconds, and then another scream. He said it sounded like I was being murdered or something. He grabs the kitchen knife and runs to my door and bangs on it a few times. There is no response, so he tries the door. It's locked. Bangs on the door again. Then there is a weird shuffling noise, as if someone is dragging their feet across the floor, hardwood floors. Sounds like someone straight up walked up to the door but didn't open it. He freaks out and doesn't know what to do, so he just stands away from the door for a while, ready to stab a motherfucker. After a few minutes of this, he just backs away staring at the door and stays awake until daylight. So we trade our accounts of the night, and we collectively shit pants, and I turn white as we are looking at each other. It dawns on us. We had both been awake at the same time at 4 a.m. Both of us called out each other's names and got no response whatsoever. I didn't hear him and he did not hear me. We couldn't hear each other through a shitty hollow wooden door. If someone was banging on my door, I would have been up in half a second. It was impossible for me to sleep through something like that. I heard no screams. It's possible that I was having a nightmare or something and screamed when I woke up. But there wasn't just one. There were two. I didn't hear either. The door was apparently locked but wasn't when I woke up. Why he did not call the police I will never know, but whatever. His family is Greek and very superstitious, so he has the local priest or whatever they call them bless the house. I'm not much of a believer in ghosts and such, but after a while I put the old man's ashes into storage and nothing weird has happened before or since. We have never found an explanation for this. Yeah. I've told this story a time or two before. When I was about 18-ish or so, I moved to a very bad neighborhood in Detroit. I lived directly across the street from an abandoned, half-burnt-out apartment complex turned crack den. The weird part is no one familiar with the place would voluntarily go into the basement of this place. At the time, I was doing a lot of hard partying and was fairly mentally unstable as an undiagnosed bipolar. I had suicide attempts under my belt and really didn't give a fuck about too much. Anyway, the subject of this basement came up at some point between a few other people I was hanging out with. Being curious, I asked why no one went into this basement. The reply was there's something bad down there. Being 18, stupid, unstable, and high, I immediately claimed bullshit and said I would spend a night down there. I waited a few days to sober up completely to ensure my brain was in decent working order. Looking back on it, I was in a fairly deep depressive cycle rather than hypomanic. So I don't believe any of my experience was a hallucination created by the disorder. So about 8 p.m.-ish, I grab my mag light and head into the building with a few people. One of them kept trying to convince me not to do it, but I wasn't having any of that. I wanted to see/experience it for myself. I went into the basement and had a solid look around with a flashlight to ensure I was actually alone. Nothing more than a concentration of flies, an errant rat, and the lovely residual smell of mold and musk. I found an old chair, put it in the corner adjacent to the stairs so I could see the entire basement and the staircase in case anyone came down, and proceeded to wait. After about an hour, I heard a loud growl about an inch away from my right ear, and a harsh, smoker for 50 years voice say, "Oh, it's you. We've been waiting for you." On the far side of the basement, I saw 3 pairs of yellowish eyes. I'm guessing, since that's how they were arranged, I clicked on the flashlight and shined it to that side of the basement. The light hit a chunk of darkness that it just wouldn't penetrate, but I could still see the shining eyes looking back through it at me. I heard a growl in my left ear and felt a searing pain down my back. I wet my pants and bolted for the stairs. My back had 3 marks that looked like scratches and burned like fuck. The mark was almost 1.5 feet long. I had nightmares for months after that experience. Of course, people don't believe this story when I relate it, and I can see why. They point to the mental illness or the drugs as the possible source. Me bumping into something as the cause of the scratch, even though my coat and shirt weren't damaged in any way. Yes, it very well all could have been a hallucination. My problem with that is, why weren't other people using the basement? Drug dealers and addicts aren't fearful people in general. Damn near everyone avoided that basement but the incredibly stupid or ignorant. I learned a lot from that experience though. Real evil exists. It turned a passive interest in the paranormal into a full-blown one. I'm convinced there were demons living in that basement. They allegedly feed on negative emotions and human misery, and that crack den is one of the most negative places I've ever been in. I looked up where I used to live on Google Maps once, and apparently the neighborhood was bulldozed and new buildings put up. The alleyway that used to be directly across the street from my porch was still there though. Can't imagine what it's like living in the house that was built on top of that location. I can't imagine it's pleasant. Anyway, that's my story. When I was 12 years old, I was playing outside with my cousins who were working on their paintball guns. Out of nowhere, my Uncle Jerry drove up in his white car and told us he saw a really bad car accident on one of the main streets by our house. He said it looked like my sister's red Mustang. My sister was out buying cookies for a church event with my 2 brothers. Before I move on, I must say, before they left, my sister and mom were arguing about whether she should go buy cookies or stay home and make some. I convinced her to go buy our favorite soft cookies from Food Source. Anyway, after he told us, we immediately went and told out mom what Uncle Jerry said. She drove to the accident and called and confirmed with us that it was my sister and 2 brothers. It turned out to be a terrible accident and my sister and brother died. Only one of my brothers survived. My sister and brother who died were beat of friends and even shared a bedroom. One night about a week after the accident, I was in my bed across from their room and I heard a bunch of the cabinets in their room open and close furiously and things being thrown against the walls. I went in and nobody was in the room, but a bunch of my sister's makeup was thrown around and the drawers were pulled out. Then I found some notes written by them and they were asking each other if they were ready to die. Cassadaga, Florida. Google it, late 80s. 3 of my friends plus a parent were coming back from the movies. The friend in the front seat yelled to look. On a bridge was a person with a devil tail. I am not shitting, a devil tail. We all saw it moving like a cat tail as he walked over the bridge. The father crossed the bridge, turned around and drove back past this. We were going maybe 15 miles per hour facing it. It was the middle of summer and it was wearing a hoodie. Even with the car headlights directly in the face of it, no one could see anything. It was like a cloud over the face. We were indeed freaking out now. The tail was clearly visible as it was moving on its own. Now we have to turn around and go back past it again to go home. Some of us were pleading to take the long way and not go past it again. One more time, even slower this time. All eyes were pinned on this thing/person with a fucking fully functioning devil tail. 10 miles per hour in my view for a solid minute. It never looked at us. Just walking down the side of the road. Now really Google Casadega, Florida and you will see. It's the witch capital of the world. I'm 43 now and get goosebumps whenever I think about it. No one in that car that night would disagree with anything I just told you. I grew up in the Midwest and would spend a lot of time on the family farm, roughly 150 acres of just soybeans and nothing, which was surrounded by a small wooded area. One night, when I was about 12 or so, I heard some cats fighting outside, so I grabbed a flashlight and started heading outside. It sounded like it was coming from the woods, so I started walking there. When I was close to the edge of the trees, I shone my flashlight in and I saw an eye shine. I thought it was a cat, so I made a noise to try to get it to move and made a few more steps forward. I don't know what it was, but it was not a cat. I remember it ran towards me and made some sort of low rumbling noise. It pushed against my legs and I lost my balance. As I did, I put my hand out to grab onto something and I felt it. It felt like bear skin. No fur. Just skin. It was about the size of a large dog. It ran off after only knocking me over, but that was enough to shake me up. To this day I have no clue what the fuck I encountered, but it really bothers me to think about it.